This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform which allows entrepreneurs to create and customize their own personal or professional website. More on Squarespace later in the video.
So hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Biographics. I'm your interim host, Karl Smallwood. That's Karl with a K and Smallwood with a small wood. And today we're talking about Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the enigmatic narcos who ruled the skies. And I should point out before we continue this video, this is not a meta thing. I've got a cold, so if you see me sniffing and like rubbing my nose, it's not me trying to make a meta joke because we're talking about a guy who smuggled bricks of cocaine. I legit have a cold. Also, I've taken a bunch of like cold and flu pills with caffeine in them, so if I seem a bit manic, that's also not a meta thing. I didn't do like a bump of cocaine before doing this. I'm just on the verge of being delirious because of how many of those things I've taken to try and get into the right frame of mind to talk about a cartel drug smuggler. I don't know where I'm going with this. Also, there's a lot of like hard to pronounce words in this one that very helpfully the author of the script today's video is based on, Arnaldo Tiazrani, has provided for me. If I do pronounce any words wrong, I do apologise. I'm trying my best. The US Drug Enforcement Administration, henceforth shortened to the DEA because I'm not saying that 15 times, once described today's main character as the most powerful drug trafficker of his time. This was not an understatement. As the head of the drug cartel of the Ciudad Juarez in northern Mexico, the man flooded the US with cheap cocaine, amassing a fortune worth billions of dollars. Thanks to his innovative use of Boeing jets, he almost monopolized the drug routes in Central and Northern America, surpassing in wealth, influence and power his more notorious Colombian counterparts. Except for, of course, that one. And yet, he always succeeded in maintaining a surprisingly low profile for a drug smuggler and evading the unwanted attention of the press and the authorities. This made him a mysterious figure of which very little was and still is known. This is the story of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies. And we start, as we often do, at the beginning. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was born on December 17, 1956 in Guamúchilauto in western Mexico. Amado, meaning beloved in Spanish, was the second of 10 children born to parents Walter Vicente and Aurora. Walter made a decent living as a modest landowner, but the spectre of poverty was always looming just around the corner. Little is known of Amado's childhood, save for the fact that he's said to have looked up to a very wealthy uncle called Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, who headed up the drug cartel of Guadalajara. Worthy of note here is that Fonseca was arrested in April 1985 and sentenced to 40 years in jail for the kidnap and murder of Enrique Quique Carmena, a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. Back in 1968, a 12-year-old Amado decided to leave his hometown, declaring to anyone who'd listen, "I won't come back until I'm rich." The boy relocated to Chihuahua, where his uncle Ernesto took him under his wing. With the tutelage of a cartel boss, Amado learned all the secrets of the drug trade, from the cultivation of marijuana and opium poppy to the refinement and distribution of the, shall we say, end product. Little else is known of Amado's formative years, except that he thrived within the Mexican gangs, first in Guadalajara, then in Juarez. During the 1970s and 80s, as Carrillo grew in confidence, influence and power, so did the cartel. They became better organised and more violent, wresting authority and control of their territory away from the hands of the government and police. During the same period, Mexican syndicates forged alliances with the undisputed masters of cocaine production and trade, Colombian kingpins such as Pablo Escobar or the Ochoa brothers. They produced the merchandise, shall we call it, refined and shipped it to the US using the Mexican cartels as little more than glorified mules. Mules that could carry tons of cocaine, but mules nonetheless. And they smuggled these shipments of powder across the border. Young Amado had observed the transport routes and taken note of the business agreements with the Colombian gangs. The Mexican runners only earned a comparatively small amount in cash per each kilogram of cocaine transported into the United States. During the 1980s, Carrillo entered the good graces of a man known as Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, known as simply El Padrino. This powerful crime figure was able to temporarily pacify the four main cartels who'd often been at war with one another: the Sinaloa, the Juarez, the Golfo, and the Tijuana. Gallardo was able to coordinate the bosses of these syndicates into a cooperative conglomerate known simply and quite ominously as the Federation. As Gallardo's protege, Amado Carrillo was able to shape and influence the future strategy of the Federation. Carrillo's plan to establish dominance within the violent and often chaotic world was simple, ambitious, and, we dare to say, quite brilliant. It's not really clear when or how, but Carrillo gradually somehow amassed a squadron of more than 20 Boeing 727 jets. He reassured his Colombian associates that with these jets, they didn't need to risk transporting cocaine to Mexico. He would take care of picking up the, again, merchandise from Colombia by just using his fleet of planes, and then he had his second innovation. In exchange for his transport services, Carrillo refused payments in cash. What he demanded instead for his cartel was a payment in product, a small percentage of the cocaine transported by the Mexicans which would be stashed away for their own use. Carrillo had picked the perfect time to put forward this offer, as Escobar and the Ochoas and their colleagues had been under increasing pressure from both the Colombian and US law enforcement agencies. To them, it was very convenient to hand over transport operations to the Mexicans, as it greatly decreased the risk of them being arrested while in transit. And they didn't really care if the Mexicans wanted to be paid in cocaine instead of cash. They had a lot of cocaine. I mean, they had a lot of cash as well, but they probably had more cocaine. And that is how Amado Carrillo became the Lord of the Skies. His Boeings soared southwards across Latin American skies, landing in secure private airstrips in Colombia that had been purchased and controlled by the cartels there. Then they flew back northwards with their holds filled with fresh loads of, as they put it, off-season snow. After the Boeing landed in Mexico, the Lord of the Skies would then distribute the goods to his gangs of trusted smugglers and distributors. Now, some of these groups can be recognised from a very distinctive image emblazoned upon their clothes and cars. Now, looking at a picture of Tweety Bird, you can probably tell that he's supposed to be a canary, but Mexican gangsters consider him to be instead a chicken, a pollo, which is also slang for an illegal border crosser, so they made Tweety Bird their mascot of sorts. Now, Carrillo's pollos did exactly that. They crossed the border with the States using the corridor running from Juarez to El Paso, Texas. They were largely undisturbed thanks to Carrillo's knack for getting allies amongst potentially rival gangs, and especially the authorities, both north and south of the border. He did so by trading favours, but mostly by just giving them big fat bribes of money and cocaine. Once across the border, Carrillo's runners deposited kilos and kilos of cocaine into safe houses using a fairly ingenious method devised by Carrillo himself and his Juarez associates. So the Narcos were frequent clients of stripper bars in Juarez. Like, what else are you going to do with mountains of cocaine and cash? And they did this out of pleasure, of course, because they were drug dealers with stacks of cash, but also with a business intent. Now, Carrillo's soldiers would strike up conversations with American exotic dancers who were active on both sides of the borders, and then made them a lucrative, almost impossible to resist offer. The offer was as follows. Once back in the US, the dancers would be asked to lease a house in their name. The cartel would pay the rent, of course, and then, for good measure, throw in an extra $1,000 a month in cash for the girls. Then, the dancers were instructed to not move into those houses, but simply pop in every now and again to make them look inhabited. All the while, Carrillo's soldiers entered regularly to deposit hundreds of bricks of pure cocaine, which would later be sold in bulk to local dealers. Now, most of the cocaine smuggled across the border was the property of the Colombian, sure, but let's not forget Carrillo's deal. A percentage of all that powder was his rightful payment. So, the Lord of the Skies was thus able to penetrate US markets, especially in California, with the cocaine he had paid virtually nothing for. Well, except for plane, fuel, and the risk that he took, but all of that would soon be recuperated, and then some. And you probably noticed at this point in the story, there were a lot of different people smuggling a lot of cocaine into the US, and in Carrillo's case, the cocaine he was trying to sell was literally the exact same kind of cocaine that the Colombians were selling. So how did he ensure that people bought his cocaine instead of the Colombian cocaine? Well, he sold it in bulk for a lower price than the Colombians and thus pushed them out of the market, trading places style. So by the early 1990s, the US Department of Justice, or DOJ, referred to Amado's enterprise as the Carrillo Fuentes Drug Trafficking Organization, which makes it sound way too legit. He had later consolidated his hold over the Juarez-El Paso smuggling route in 1993 after assassinating the nominal head of the Juarez cartel, a man called Rafael Aguilar Guajardo. Thank you for the pronunciation guide there, Arnoldo. Much appreciated, because I would have messed that one all the way up. This control over the most frequented smuggling route allowed Carrillo to enact his third big innovation. He allowed other gangs to run drugs across that route, but they had to pay a tax to Amado and his second-in-command, his own brother, Vicente, known simply as the Viceroy. The DOJ noted that Amado and the Viceroy maintained their grip on the Juarez cartel by a chain of favours given and received, but mostly with big fat bribes of cocaine and cash. Amado had been credited with handing out some $500 million in bribes every single year, a figure that's kind of difficult to confirm, as his accountant didn't exactly file these bribes under business expenses, although they technically were. And fun fact for people at home, in the US at least, illegal income can be taxed, and there is actually a tax form that you can fill out for illegal income. And if you're currently wondering, if I'm making money illegally, why would I willingly pay taxes on it? Because that's how they got Al Capone. When favours and bribes failed to meet Carrillo's goals, he did not shy away from violence. He was the head of a cartel after all. He's said to have ordered the assassination of some 400 people during his not so illustrious career as a drug kingpin. And yet, despite all this violence and the enormous amounts of wealth surrounding him, the Lord of the Skies always succeeded in maintaining a incredibly low profile, shunning the flashy lifestyle of his Colombian counterparts. Like, he still had lots of money and flaunted it, but just not publicly. To Amado, Carrillo, drug trafficking was business, plain and simple, one that would net him some $25 billion. Sure, a fortune rivaled only by that of Pablo Escobar, but he was just a plain and simple businessman with a sense of duty towards his employees. Legend has it that a priest tried to convince him to abandon his life of crime, to which Carrillo is said to have replied, "I cannot retire. I have to go on. I need to provide for thousands of families," those families being his employees, which admittedly were drug dealers and smugglers and assassins for hire, but they were still his employees, which you kind of have to respect, right? Oh, I guess I'm back in the void. Time to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. Nearby Nisha, would you like to join me in the void talking about today's sponsor?
Of course I would.
Yes, no one escapes the void.
Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform used to create websites by professionals and amateurs alike.
Well, that sounds like it includes me because I'm somewhere in the middle of amateur and professional. So, hell yeah, perfect! What else do they do?
You can use Squarespace to sell products, content, time, or advertise your business.
Well, it all sounds like things I want to do online, and I can make a website that would allow me to do all of those things. That is very interesting. Tell me more about your service and/or product.
So a good thing about Squarespace is you can check the analytics and learn where your visitors to your site come from.
So you're telling me that I could use this to find out where the people in the world come from who want to listen to my words? That sounds intriguing and like something I would be obsessed with.
You can also create email campaigns to collect email subscribers and deliver any updates.
Wow, a service that lets people who click to subscribe to something actually see updates from that thing. That sounds like a good idea. Maybe they should implement that on other places on the internet.
You can also create your own online course.
Ooh, and I'm guessing that you can, if you want to, charge people a one-time fee or a subscription per lesson for something like that, yes?
Indeedy.
That sounds like a great idea. That sounds like a good way to do what I think the kids call the side hustle. That's right, I'm down with the kids, I know all the lingo. Thank you to today's sponsor. Check out Squarespace at squarespace.com/biographics for 10% off on your first purchase of a website/domain using the code Biographics. So if anything I said sounds intriguing, check out the links below for a link to today's sponsor, Squarespace. But I'm going to end, as I often like to do, with a bonus fact for everyone at home. Did you know, folks at home, that scientific studies have proved conclusively that dogs like reggae? In 1994, the US DEA set up a task force to bring down the Carrillos once and for all, and their leading assets were Special Agents Edward Follis and Steve Whipple, both based in El Paso. During one of their raids, the two agents uncovered one of Carrillo's safe houses in El Paso containing about 800 kilos of pure cocaine. The agents found out that it had been leased in the name of Carolina Morrison, a 24-year-old exotic dancer, also known as Tammy. Almost right away, Follis and Whipple set about trying to find Tammy, grilling the owners of all the major strip clubs in town. Unfortunately, they learned later that they'd moved just a little too late. A squad of narcos had abducted her and she'd been taken south of the border. And you can probably tell what happened next. In the eyes of Carrillo, Tammy had committed a capital crime. She'd been found out and she had to pay. Like many others who'd fallen foul of the Lord of the Skies, Tammy was killed at the hands of the cartel, her body dismembered and then dissolved in acid. Follis now needed another conduit to get closer to Carrillo. By working his sources in El Paso, he managed to recruit an informant, a young gangster called Palomo. Palomo advised Follis to put under surveillance one of Carrillo's underlings, a man called Joaquin Guzman, soon to visit El Paso. This too turned out to be a dead end, as it appeared that Guzman was in town on a legitimate business to purchase some kitchen supplies. The DEA left him alone on that occasion, a decision they would certainly come to regret. This Guzman guy would later become one of the most dangerous kingpins in all of Mexico, better known by his nickname El Chapo. Yes, That's El Chapo. But that's a story for another day, let's not lose sight of Carrillo. His most trusted squad of coke smugglers were the Espinosas, a gang of brothers and cousins whose shipments had previously been thwarted by Special Agent Whipple, who was a wizard at intercepting radio chatter among the cartels. This was a promising lead for Follis. The Special Agent, an expert at undercover work, donned the persona of Fast Eddie, a corrupt private investigator with a side hustle as an assassin for hire. How is this not a movie? And I know it's in Narcos, but how is that sounds like something out of who'd believe that? I'm a corrupt private investigator called Fast Eddie. Bang, bang, bang. That's clearly a guy undercover. With the help of Paloma, Fast Eddie arranged a meeting with the Espinosas, during which he suggested that he too had a grudge against Agent Whipple, and in very veiled terms, Fast Eddie hinted that he could take care of that annoying DEA man. Follis was very careful to give plenty of opportunities for the Espinosas to back down, lest his undercover action be classed as entrapment, but the Tweety Birds took the bait and offered him $10,000 for the assassination of Whipple. It's the idea of $10,000 for someone's life. Next, with the help of a team of forensic experts, Follis staged the murder of Whipple, smearing his friend in ketchup and fake blood before taking some very convincing Polaroids. Unfortunately, the Espinosas must have smelled something was amiss, as they refused to meet again with Fast Eddie to settle the payment, which was admittedly another setback, as the second meeting could have been the stepping stones to finally incriminating Carrillo. In any case, Follis had caught their early conversation on tape, and the Espinosas were arrested for conspiracy to commit murder of a federal agent. Follis and Whipple did not desist though, and they planned how to bust the Carrillo brothers themselves, but Amado and Vicente Carrillo had a strict policy of meeting directly only with other Mexicans, which would prevent Follis from infiltrating their inner circle. The agents were thus then forced to basically rely on their only real source, their informant Paloma. The young narco, appropriately wired, was able to meet with the Carrillos on 9 separate occasions, recording countless incriminating bits of evidence on tape. Armed with those tapes, the DEA and the US Attorney's Office were able to build a pretty convincing case against Carrillo, and Follis and Whipple were about this close to obtaining the extradition order for the Lord of the Skies. Apparently this would be the beginning of the end for Carrillo, and his fall would be as quick as his rise, although the exact chain of events is not clear and still debated to this day. Now, according to Follis, in the mid-1990s, Carrillo got wind that something was afoot. It's not known how, but Follis speculates that a high-ranking mole, either in the US or in Mexico, informed the so-called Lord of the Skies that the DEA was about to take him down. As we've already discussed, Carrillo did not exactly lack friends in high places, and for example in the early 1990s he secured on his payroll none other than the head of Mexico's anti-drug agency. You cannot make this stuff up. A man called General Gutierrez Rebello. But even being friends with the guy literally in charge of the anti-drug agency of Mexico was not enough for Carrillo to feel safe. Mexican authorities were still closing in, and the Lord of the Skies needed more friends in the military. Now, according to the Washington Post, in January 1997, Carrillo entrusted his right-hand man, a guy called Eduardo Gonzalez Correte, to organize a meeting with high-ranking military officials and to propose an arrangement of sorts. And the Cliff Notes version of the deal that Carrillo proposed is that if the government agreed to leave him alone and let him do his own thing, he would agree to only traffic his drugs in the US and Europe, not in Mexico. Moreover, he would commit to pumping back some of the money he made from his trafficking into the Mexican economy. And then, as a final bargaining chip, he offered to collaborate with the police and authorities to suppress what he called freelance drug smuggling, which is just a euphemism for his own competitors. And while again this sounds like something straight out of a movie, the Mexican Defense Secretary immediately admitted that such a meeting had taken place with Carrillo's right-hand man, but that the involved officials had declined the drug kingpin's offer. This said, in February 1997, the Mexican police did arrest General Gutierrez Rebello after a wiretap on his phone revealed that he had been negotiating bribes with Carrillo. The crooked general was arrested and sentenced to 31 years in prison. During the trial, he confirmed that Carrillo's associates had indeed met with the defense officials, including the Secretary of Defense himself, and that the right-hand man Correte had paid the Secretary of Defense a bribe of $6 million. According to Gutierrez, the officials had pocketed the kickback and later refused to meet their end of the deal. And you don't know how to feel. I'm going to take money off the drug kingpin, but then we're not going to do what the drug kingpin asks, which is really ballsy considering, Carrillo's modus operandi when it came to someone not doing what he said was to hack off their legs and boil them in acid. So I get well done, those government officials, So to recap, Carrillo was losing his once many friends in high places, and this became evident when, shortly after the arrest of General Gutierrez, police raided Carrillo's sister's wedding reception. Amado managed to escape just before the arrival of the officers. Now, pressure was indeed mounting, and the once uncontested King of Juarez began to fear for his life, and indeed his freedom, moving around the city only in specially kitted out vans. Inside, they were as luxurious as a high-end limousine, but outside looked like a regular ambulance, a vehicle no police officer would dare to stop. But he knew the long-term solution was to flee Mexico for good. So on March 3rd, 1997, Carrillo entered Chile by car alongside his family, his personal physician, and his right-hand man, the aforementioned González Cuerete. The drug lord then spent 3 months in the capital city of Santiago, during which he bought 11 cars, bought or rented 12 real estate properties, and founded a company he called Hercules Limited to act as a front for his illegal operations. Then on June 6th, Carrillo relocated to Cuba, where he spent 3 weeks in a residential compound reserved for government guests. According to the DEA, Fidel Castro's government had no idea they were playing host to a cartel leader. To them, Carrillo was just a wealthy businessman willing to invest in Cuba's economy. And then, for unknown reasons, Carrillo decided to cut short his visit to Havana and return abruptly to Mexico. In early July, Carrillo checked into a private hospital in Santa Monica de Polanco in Mexico City. He'd arranged for his personal physician and 3 other surgeons to perform liposuction and facial reconstruction procedures. Clearly, he wanted to change his appearance and disappear into the wind for good. During the surgery, the doctors had radically changed the features and appearance of Carrillo's face and removed some 14 kilos of fat from his waistline. But when he woke up, Amado Carrillo did not feel well at all, as is wont to happen when you've just had radical face-altering surgery. The pain was just too much, and he asked the anesthesiologist for painkillers, lots of them, and then he asked for more. The doctor was reluctant, but didn't really want to argue with a drug kingpin who hacked people's legs off and boiled them in acid, and eventually complied. And so it was that the Lord of the Skies, the untouchable leader of the Juarez cartel, a man who'd smuggled literally tons of cocaine into the United States, died as the consequence of a simple drug overdose. Irony was invented for moments like this, and his death set off a macabre chain of consequences. First, as soon as news spread of his death, conspiracy theories mushroomed, suggesting that his death was not an accident, but a planned hit ordered by his enemies. Similarly, other conspiracists believed that Amado Carrillo was still alive. In death, his face was unrecognizable, bruised and distorted. There's actually footage out there of Mexican officials, going to his open casket funeral to determine whether or not it's him, and the comments are filled with people saying he's not dead, because Narcos, the TV show, suggested that he survived, not realising that Narcos, the TV show, took a lot of liberties with the truth. But the fact that even to this day, people still are conspiring that this guy is still alive, I think speaks to the extent of the conspiracies and just, the muddied facts surrounding them. So what if he had faked his death to evade the authorities, or to quickly retire from the drug business and hand over his empire to his brother Vicente, aka the Viceroy? And for any conspiracists out there, it's worth noting that the aforementioned DEA agents Follis and Whipple did travel to Amado's birthplace to attend his open casket funeral, where they were able to take a fingerprint off his corpse and match it to one kept on record at the DEA. With Carrillo's death now confirmed, his enemies rampaged through the streets of Juarez, massacring members of his organisation, and after 30 days of violence and 94 murders, the Viceroy did manage to assert his dominance over the cartel and restore order. And finally, the last act of Carrillo's gruesome funeral rites took place on November 6th, 1997, which is where the remains of the 3 doctors who'd operated on him were found dead inside 3 barrels in the Mexico City Acapulco motorway. Like many among the victims of the cartel, they had been dismembered and partially dissolved in acid. The Juarez cartel continued to operate under Vicente Carrillo, but he lacked the authority, the brilliance of his late brother. The alliances among the cartels brokered by Amado eventually dissolved, contributing to the increase of gang violence in Mexico. Eventually, Vicente was brought to justice and sentenced to 28 years in prison in 2014. This could be considered the final chapter to the dark epic of the Lord of the Skies, a paradoxical figure whose ruthless brilliance was always veiled by an almost impenetrable screen of mystery. Unlike many of his acolytes and colleagues in the darkest of trades, he did not fall under the bullets of his enemies nor the gavel of justice. That is why perhaps he still enjoys a cult-like status in his native Mexico, where to this day many are still convinced that he's alive somewhere out there planning to make his return. As reported by the Mexican outlet Grandios Medios, DEA Administrator Thomas A. Constantine confirmed that there is no doubt that Carrillo is indeed dead and spending eternity in a very special place, stating, and I quote, "He may have escaped justice on this earth, but I am sure there is a special place in hell for those like him, who destroy countless lives and devastated families on both sides of the border." So I hope everybody out there found this video to be entertaining, informative, and educational. I certainly found the script to be all three of those things, and if you are inclined to agree, you can find the author of this piece, Arnoldo Teodrani, at the links found below. You can also find my social media links, and while you're down there clicking on things, you can like the video, leave a comment, feedback, suggestions, any word I pronounce wrong, make fun of my nasally voice because I have a cold, or my appearance because I'm a little bit pale, or paler than usual for a British guy, and subscribe for more content like this. But as I always like to say to everyone out there, go out there and have the day you deserve. And don't do drugs or mess with the Mexican cartel. They'll cut your legs off and melt you in acid. That's not a good way to go. Cheers!